everyone. Thank you for joining us. My name is Tania Rak, and I am SFL's Senior Coordinator in Ukraine and Poland. And today I will cover more information about the ongoing war in my country and the consequences that it might have for European Union, especially with these night's developments in Poland, which I did not expect to happen. Probably no one did. Yet I think that it just showcases why it is important to speak that the current situation in Ukraine is not just the Ukrainian case, but it goes in sequence with what can happen in the next several years in Europe. Briefly about me, why I'm occupying 1 hour of your time today. I'm Tanya. I'm Ukrainian. I have master's in journalism and communications, and I work almost 10 years in this field. I'm also the chief operations officer of We Are Innovation Global Network that is working on innovation policies. I was covering war in Ukraine and war crimes with different tier 1 media. I'm a public speaker and I'm a part of Students for Liberty, Lola Poland, and also I'm the head of partnerships at Speak Freely magazine. But also I am a Ukrainian national and I'm from Eastern Ukraine. On this slide, you can see what Russian invasion resulted into and what it turned my native city, which is Mariupol, to just in 2 months. Probably some of you could see this picture on the internet because it was all over the news. It was Mariupol drama theater that was hit by the air bomb in March 2022 during the siege of Mariupol. During the time, more than 1,000 of people were hiding in the basement of the theater as in a shelter. And what got on the internet was that even the inscription children, because there were several hundred of children hiding in the basement as well, did not stop Russian army from the attack to this theater. This is to illustrate this my house, and this is the leftovers of what 20-something years of life look like. However, I would like to focus on, first of all, explaining the timeline and the developments, because it is not just the full-scale invasion since 2022. Russia prefers to act gradually here and test the waters. So I suggest you to go over the chronology and follow me here with the timeline of Russian aggression. So let's talk about 2013. So 2013 started with the Revolution of Dignity, also known as Euromaidan. And there Ukrainian chose dignity and Europe over joining the alliance with Russia, and officially stated that they want to take the course towards European future. However, it resulted in a way of protests which were also called anti-Maidan, and in 2014 it led to the illegal Crimea annexation. But not only that, in 2014 it also resulted into fueling war in Donbass and in Lugansk. Technically, it also was in the state of the frozen conflict, and I remember that myself, that during high school it was quite dangerous to walk around since they were shooting at the suburbs of the city, also destroying one of the micro districts, specifically targeting civilian areas on Saturday when people were doing groceries at the market. And unfortunately, there were lots of victims. That resulted in proclaiming so-called Donetsk Republic of People and Lugansk of People. My native city of Mariupol, it was of the strategic importance because it was the port city and also it was the corridor between Russia and technically Crimea. So it remained Ukrainian, but unfortunately with a high number of losses. And here we are in 2022. Russia launched the full-scale invasion, making things much, much more complicated for us. We need to understand how it was all unfolding, other than in 2014 and the years between that. So in the late 2021, Russia concentrated quite a significant military forces and equipment near the borders with Ukraine and conducted joint military training with Belarus. But however, when this military training was over, the troops were not being withdrawn. And later there started the developments where international partners and stakeholders were claiming that there can be the danger of full-scale invasion and aggression on the side of Russia. Later, if to monitor the news, you could easily see that both international media, Ukrainian media, and even Russian media were giving the sign that there might be the escalation and in danger. You could also hear people on the streets walking around, and all that they could talk about is what you would do in case if there will be the war. Do you have the emergency suitcase? Do you have cash? What's your plan? So you could feel that there was already tension in the air. Then on the 3rd of December, the Ministry of Defense of Ukraine reported that there already was a possibility of a large-scale escalation, which was proclaimed by special services. And they expected to have that by the end of January 2022. Media was quite often releasing the statements that the war will start on this date, then another date, and nothing was happening. But unfortunately, I like to compare it to this fabula about the boy and the wolves, when a boy was worried that wolves will attack and telling the people that in fact they did, and then nothing was happening. And on the third time, no one believed that, and this is when it happened. So the same it was with this war. But before that, it was preceded by a global cyber attack on Ukrainian government websites, where lots of private data was leaked. So unfortunately, all wars are hybrid wars, and cyber attack was one of the signs. And more than that, this private data also contained the information about people who were so-called a danger to Russia, Russian Federation. And should I tell you that those people were supposed to get killed once the escalation started. A few days before the beginning of the full-scale war, Russian president announced that Russia is recognizing two occupied regions in eastern Ukraine, so Donetsk Republic of People and Lugansk Republic of People. And on February 24th, at approximately 4 a.m., there was the beginning of the full-scale invasion. It started with eastern parts, but simultaneously there were explosions in areas near Kharkiv, Chernigiv, Kiev, and other things. There was a huge panic, and obviously, even while people were thinking that this scenario is possible, realistically speaking, people who were brought up with the narrative never again actually never thought that it would be possible again. But here we are. To speak about next developments, in February 2022, after the launch of the full-scale invasion, there were major developments on the frontier. There were such misfortune developments as Mariupol siege, but also the massacres in Bucha, massacres in Irpin, mass attacks at Kiev. So later in 2022, Kharkiv region was liberated, Kherson city as well. But then in 2023, there started the heavy fighting in Donbass, and it's still going on. Even today, there were notifications on my app that tracks the current development. at the front line, and there was a notification about suggestions on evacuation people from certain parts of this region due to heavy shooting. Russia also intensified the missile strikes, the drone strikes. If you remember, there were major attacks on energy facilities of Ukraine, and that resulted in blackouts. It was quite a complicated winter for Ukrainians. However, we are slowly moving to 2020-24. So Ukraine, despite that, tried to deepen the EU and NATO integration as much as it was possible, but the continuation was the massive attacks to grain and energy sectors. Also, if we are moving to 2025, of course, the strikes continue. This year, I think the record was 800 drones only per night over Ukrainian skies. And there are massive bombings of Odessa, Mykolaiv, Kyiv, and also the drone warfare that has been terrorizing people since the beginning of war. Also, there was a Chernobyl strike because on February 14th, a Russian drone basically hit the new confinement structure. Luckily, there was no any radiation spike or anything, but it was more the weapon of fear to show that if we want, we can. And this year, there we can see that there are first diplomatic developments as well. Next slide. So this February, there was the US-Russia summit in Riyadh that laid the groundwork for future negotiation frameworks. However, Ukraine was excluded from being present at this negotiation process. In March, the US and Ukraine basically started the moratorium on energy infrastructure attacks, but it was later expired because of the hostilities and because of constant bombing that was never really stopped. There was a London summit that brought together 16 nations plus the EU, the NATO, and allowed to formulate the 4-point peace plan that emphasized that Ukraine keeps on receiving the military support, security guarantees, and other things. Then from May to June, there were first direct talks in Istanbul that was a progress since 2022, but basically it just resulted into a prisoner swap, and Russia kept on demanding of lots of concessions on the Ukrainian side. Then from the most recent ones, which probably you were checking on the news, there was the Alaska summit between Trump and Putin. And in September, President Zelensky claimed that he would be open to a frozen frontline scenario, but only if it would be backed by security guarantees from the international partners. And right now there are the developments on security coalition for me. But what I want to talk today is to talk about the liberty and war. What are the current impacts and why we really need to see Ukraine as a bigger picture and not to judge it as there is only Ukraine's war, or if we have some people from Western countries, so the US, at the webinar to address questions why to pay taxes, how long it would be, wouldn't it be easier that Ukraine would just give up on territories, why not to agree on terms that were proposed and stuff. So let's bring it down more. What is really behind Russian aggression? It is really not territorial, but it is just about destroying liberty itself, because in occupied areas, people are being killed, people are being silenced, people are being deported. And in fact, if we look back to the history and Russian imperialistic ambitions, it is about erasing the culture. Unfortunately, it is a big loss for our country because lots of talented young people were either killed during the aggression, or they are being targeted, or they are being censored, or lots of people also were forced to flee the country, which means that the country will also lose of lots of intelligence class, creative class, which would also put many questions on further developments, cultural developments. The same goes with language issue, with not recognizing Ukrainian language as the official language of a sovereign country with border ceremony of 1991. And if we look back at Ukrainian history, it is not the first time, so never happened, and here we go again. What are the tools of Russian aggression, except of shaheds and missiles? It is propaganda, it is censorship, and they are spreading tones of fake narratives. First of all, we need to remember that all wars are hybrid wars these days, and that's why information war, it is one of the weapons against liberty. Another way how they are using their propaganda is basically weaponization of confusion, because the goal when media outlets publish something is not necessarily to convince people that something is black and something is white, but to overwhelm people to this extent with so many conflicting versions that they no longer trust any truth at all. And this is quite dangerous. It is happening inside Russia, so propaganda frames this as a special military operation, liberation from Nazists, from Kiev junta, and whatever the headlines are being said. Independent journalists in Russia are jailed or silenced, or they were forced to flee, leave in the country, leave in their posts. And abroad, there are also tons of fake narratives. For example, that NATO provokes the war, that Ukraine does not exist, that sanctions hurt the West more. But of course, this weapon keeps to much more confusion. How to fact check? I think that as a person with journalistic background, I need to touch base on that. And while to some of you this might be obvious, I do not know who is our audience today, so I always say that check the source. Double check, triple check, quadruple check. You need to check out whether it is a credible outlet, whether this is a trustworthy journalist, what this journalist was covering before. Is it an official institution? What is the domain of the website? Also, I know that some of people were falling for the trap in the beginning of war, speaking for Ukrainian people, some anonymous Telegram, WhatsApp channels, and I understand that sometimes in the days where information is very saturated, it is quite tempting to look for certain alternatives and check out what else is there or what is the niche information, but I still ask you to double check what you read, and if you read something disturbing, do not fall into panics at once, but try to check out media outlets that can be even very polar, because I do not think it is healthy to trust only one side or another side. You need to read, you need to analyze, and then you need to find the truth somewhere in between. That's where we are moving to the second point, which is verifying with multiple outlets. And yeah, real news appear across independent sources, not just one. Another thing is that you need to check out the date, you need to check the context, pay attention to the metadata of the information that you see, because quite often old images and videos are being recycled as new. Quite often there is no source of the video. Sometimes the videos are being just put as breaking news, and it can be footage from absolutely other geographical region in an absolutely different context that was already happening multiple times during this war. So try to educate you in terms of metadata. Another thing is I advise you to use the reverse image search. Tools like Google Lens or Tine they can show if a photo or video was used elsewhere before, and if so, where. Check out the language cues. Do not trust the clickbait, shocking, breaking news. They do not want you to know, etc., etc. And also follow fact checkers. I wrote a few platforms that I'm using myself. And if you want, you can screenshot or write it down or take a picture and use that when you are verifying the news. Hope you did. Next slide. But tonight, as I explained to you, the current situation in Ukraine with massive drones attack, with missiles, there was a kind of new development. And tonight, Russian drones crossed Polish airspace. And when I was preparing to come to you and present on this webinar, I was thinking about the cases that could illustrate the danger of war in Ukraine. But while I could speak more on the scenario of what if, here is the what if. And I think it is quite a test to European Union and to NATO, and it is quite a test for the reaction that West can look at. So what happened today in more details? This night at around 2-3 a.m., Russian drones crossed Polish airspace, which activated Article 4 of NATO, and most of these drones were shot. Another development that happened at the same night was in Romania, and Romania scrambled fighter jets this morning, very shortly after the development happened in Poland. And that all brings the concerns in case if Ukraine fails, what happens next? Is it the time for European Union to redefine itself, whether this is a protector of liberty or whether European Union is just an institution? And here is why it is important to pay attention at what happened this night. First of all, which kind of security threats that imposes to neighboring countries? Because if Ukraine falls, we can look at the history lessons. Russian aggression will not stop just at its borders. So Eastern Europe, including Poland, Baltic countries, can easily become the next front line. Drone strikes show that this risk is real. While I do not think that this particular situation just illustrates that something will happen in a month or in 2 months, and rather I see it as a diplomatic response to what happened recently, to closing borders with Belarus. But I think that this is testing the water, and as much as West can tolerate, as much Russia understands that aggression will be tolerated, and it just opens and unties hands for next developments. Another point that I want to pay your attention to is the political threats, because pro-Kremlin narratives, populism will grow much stronger in case if European Union appears here weak. Besides, it also opens the possibilities for other authoritarian regimes to claim its power. So, but why is it beyond Ukraine? So, first things first, Poland. Drones are striking in sight. It is already the second time in the recent time, and that proves that war is European. And it does not really matter, as I wrote on this slide, whether liberty will be compromised with bombs in Kharkiv or it will be drones in Poland. The Article 5 is already being tested. So the reactions of NATO will identify what will be happening in the next several months, how the security in Europe will be compromised by Russia or whether it will not. And there are several aspects. First of all, it is the psychological warfare, and I'm pretty much sure that this is one of the hybrid war tactics that I was talking about a few slides ago, because it is creating the image in the media, in public landscape, that spreads fear, that spreads the panics. Even if to go on social media today, I'm speaking about my personal feed on Instagram, on Facebook, on Twitter. There are lots of people that are scared, and that also allows to create more manipulation. Also, in Poland, to create the anti-Ukrainian sentiment, labeling it as Ukraine forcing its narratives, drones being Ukrainian, and Ukraine also forcing Poland to take an action and step into the war. So there are lots of tools to manipulate people's consciousness here, and it is very dangerous. That's why it is necessary also not to fall into panics, but just to understand what comes with what, compare it with previous lessons from Ukraine, and jump to your conclusions. But the next risk, in case if there is not harsh enough reaction from the European Union and from NATO, it can cause the spillover risks for Europe. Because first of all, if we are speaking about the possibility of war developments in other European countries, firstly, energy infrastructure across Europe could become a direct target. And second of all, bordering states already in high alert. It is not only Poland, it's other Baltic countries, so it creates the additional risk. So the question here is it still just a Ukrainian war, and how deeply should Europe be concerned? The question is whether the EU will remain a regulatory body focused on rules, markets, will it rise as a protector of liberty indeed? And yeah, the risks are huge. And I think that Ukraine's path towards the EU, it is really not just about accession talks, but it is more about shaping Europe's identity these days. So if so, then it comes to global stakes, because right now Russia is testing the development, and it is the message that in case if there is no response for violence, then it means that aggression works. Other authoritarian regimes, as I said, like Iran, China, they will be more than encouraged to test world's liberty, civil freedoms. And that's why Ukraine matters globally, because I do not think that any country should repeat this scenario, but that's why it is important not to be silent right now, because potentially it can result in many more losses in case if there is the inaction. Inaction is danger in this world, and unfortunately, I do not think that only diplomatic talks that the EU is having right now is enough. I think that Europe should take care about their own security and safety firstly and foremostly, also not to over rely on the aid from the US that much, but to take care about what is waiting for them right now and right here. So that's why I think that Ukraine's fight today is a global fight for freedom. And I think that each unchecked escalation just makes the next one bolder. Think of it that Russia is also testing the waters quite gradually. War in Ukraine did not happen only in one day. Firstly, there were bonds of the previous government with Russia. Then there was Euromaidan. Then there was the anti-Maidan. Then there was the Crimea. Then there was Donbass. There was Lugansk, and it was ongoing for multiple years. Then there was the military training, disguised military training that allowed Russia to concentrate the troops. So I think that countries just need to learn from that. In Polish context, Belarus is quite close. And what if? I do not want to speak about hypothetical, but I think that in these times, the times of uncertainty, the times that are no longer safe, and the times where the narratives of never again are being pretty much questioned, it is important to think about every possible scenario and to act as much preventively and as much harsh as it is possible. Because what if? What if Russia pushes further in towards the NATO airspace? What if there is no response? Or the response will not be enough. So, and here is what will happen. First of all, NATO's credibility depends on its collective defense clause, and in case if the attack is not being treated fully, then the whole alliance is risking to be unraveled. Secondly, hesitation or inaction would also make Russia more bold towards next targets, and it will signal weaknesses towards regimes, as I mentioned you already before, China, Iran. Weak response can compromise Poland and the Baltics. And Ukraine could be forced into concessions, creating a precedent that Russian aggression pays. And in the end, if there is the inaction today, Russian victory will put Eastern Europe, perhaps Baltics, Western Europe towards a major destabilization. And in fact, it will just encourage many more military special operations. And they are already breaking the international law, but I think that it will just escalate. So here I just want to ask you one question. You can take it as a food for thought, as a reflection, because what if liberty will not be defended in Ukraine? Where can it fall next? Which country can be targeted next? Whether you personally would like to experience that individually or as a citizen of a country, it does not matter. And then whether it makes sense for Europe to finally wake up and start taking actions. So thank you. I'm open to the questions.
Thank you very much, Tania. It was a great presentation. Basically, I'll be reading you the question from the chat. When someone wants to additionally ask the question personally, they can raise the hands. I will give them the access to speak after the questions that I will be reading. So, starting for the first that we had from Edward Knapp. It seems that this aggression started earlier than many realized. Would you say that world leaders were not paying attention to the situation?
Yes, I would say so. Because again, the question, how do you understand the aggression started earlier than many realized? Are we talking about the current developments? Are we talking about the full-scale invasion, or are we speaking about Maidan, or are we speaking the timeline before that? But obviously, like aggression, it is a product. But what we need to understand that it takes years of preparations. It takes the groundwork. It takes the strong allies on the ground. And yes, I think that for a certain amount of time, Ukrainian cause was not highlighted enough. It was, I cannot say that it was not gaining the international support in 2013, for example, when the Revolution of Dignity was happening. But however, if I was going to any international events, conferences, security forums, and I was speaking with people about the situation in Donbass or Lugansk. Not that many people were aware about the situation being ongoing, and that also means that there was not enough of highlighting that on the international scale.
Forward then question from Marcela Lozano. What about the Nazi soldiers or movements that Russia meant? So basically referring to the Russian propaganda being done, like what they are referring even to.
Basically, what is being abused here is the rights of Russian-speaking population, and that was referred mostly to eastern part of Ukraine, and it allows to manipulate electorate, to manipulate people in Russia themselves that Russian language is being forbidden, which was not true. I come from Russian-speaking region, and Russian and Ukrainian languages peacefully coexisted. Um, Another thing is referring to so-called Kiev junta, where again the rights of people, the rights of civilians, were not taken into account, and that was pretty much it. They were even issuing fake news about what Ukrainian Nazis it's in Russian babies, and I wish I was joking, but that was the official media releases of the official media channels um, that were associated with government. Could
Going
not hear.
forward, going forward then, question from Harrison Oma. That's quite straightforward one. What is the reason for invasion? So I guess we are not sitting in Putin's mind, so we don't know what is his real reasons to go for that. But what do you think then? What he's trying to accomplish with that?
Well, first of all, he was pretty much straightforwardly claiming in media space and not for only one time that he has a sentiment for the USSR and he wants to bring it back. Second of all, that's the territory. The territories that during 19th century were under Russian Empire, and basically he wants to take these territories back. So there is a major claim for territories like Donbas, Lugansk, that are already occupied currently, Kherson, Odessa, Crimea, that was already illegally annexed.
Then
And imperialistic ambitions, of course, that goes hand in hand.
yeah, we could see it in the Russian imperialist mindset for among the history. So, and then this is one question we've teased already, but how do you think the USA is involved as a catalyst to Russian and Ukraine conflict?
I think that there should be a specification whether we are talking about the US with Trump or the US with Biden. But overall, are we talking about the aid? Are we talking about current developments? Because right now, my estimation of the situation is quite negative if we even look at was with what was happening with recent one-on-one meetings of Putin and Trump, the meetings where Ukraine is excluded and there is the uh, claim for peace talks, but in fact, it also means for Ukraine to surrender or give up almost 25% of the territories. I think that this is a major problem. And I also do not want to sound ungrateful and to underestimate the support of the US that was given to Ukraine and that still is being given with military, with humanitarian aid, or with programs like United for Ukraine, receiving Ukrainian refugees. However, we need to disseminate the help and the current stance of the political leader. Also note that today, or rather tonight, when the drones got into Polish territory, Trump withdrawn from any comments when journalists were asking him what is his stance and what he thinks the developments can be. Just a food for thought.
The history of Russia and Ukraine. How much of this war is rooted in long-standing identity, culture, and territorial disputes, rather than just present-day politics?
This is what I was already touching base on. It is Russian imperialistic ambitions, even if we are talking about, so of course, like part of Ukraine was under Russian Empire for several centuries, and that also put the trace on that. with the claim for Ukrainian territories, for lack of sovereignty, for forbidding Ukrainian language and using Russian. But even if we are speaking about the time of the USSR, we can talk about the repressions. We can talk about 30s, for example, 30s when so many people who were representatives of the Ukrainian intelligence, they were shot down, and there is a term as shot down. Um, Sorry, my English stopped English in for a moment. Um, Розстріляне відродження, which is shot down Renaissance. And that also illustrates there was that there was a problem since many decades and even centuries. In 60s there was the same when Ukrainian dissidents were trying to bring back the Ukrainian culture, and that was absolutely in a peaceful way, just issuing books, for example, in Ukrainian language, or organizing some events to highlight the national culture. These people were either imprisoned, or they were killed, or they disappeared under mysterious circumstances, or they were sent to Gulag. And the same was after and after and after. So it is an issue, as the author of the question rightfully mentioned. It's been for a long time. It's not just a 3 years war.
Eastward expansion truly justifies Russia's sense of insecurity, or is that just an excuse used by Moscow?
Could you please repeat the beginning of the question, because I think that you were on mute or your connection was breaking.
No worries. Do you think NATO's eastward expansion truly justified Russian sense of insecurity, or is that just an excuse used by Moscow?
I think that this is kind of an excuse, but speaking of the sense of insecurity, I think that there is this sentiment of keeping certain countries, certain territories, and geopolitical control that already was, let's say, during the USSR, and this impact that Russia is creating around these areas, around these territories, it basically became a part of the trigger. One of them, but not the main one.
As Ukraine's struggle for independence and democracy challenge Russian vision of its regional influence?
To be fair, I do not understand the part of the question on struggle for independence. Ukraine is the independent state since 1991, and it is being recognized internationally as such. However, I think that Ukraine not choosing the path that has to do things with Russia and choosing the European future, it definitely was a trigger for Russian ambitions.
What's the philosophy behind this thought about Russian supremacy over Slav people? We have seen this before in USSR, the Ukrainian Russification that ended in the tragedy of Holodomor.
Mm, First of all, Holodomor is not necessarily connected with Russification. It was the artificially created hunger, and there were even two of them in 30s, 1932, 1933, and post Second World War, where they just took away the grain from people to create the international precedent of how Second World War drained people. And by the way, they did not do that in that time only with Ukrainians, but also with representatives of other people from different Soviet republics. And second of all, what was the first part of the question?
The
Sorry.
beginning was what's the philosophy behind this thought about Russian supremacy over Slav people?
I think that this comes together with the idea of the supremacy country. If you look at the map of the world, Russian territory, Russia being the hugest country in the world, it is also a psychological trick, for example, because the size is usually not not being used in the landscape that is real, which also proves is supposed to prove that it is the most impactful country. Then it is the 100 centuries of Russian Empire and taking new and new and new territories. Then it is definitely the USSR and the policies of Russia being recognized as the most important leading USSR state. And we could see that not again only with Ukraine, but forced Russification was across other Soviet republics, which also explains why so many people are still speaking Russian while this is not being their first language or the language that is being recognized as official language of the country. I do not hear you.
It's okay?
Yes.
Okay, so going more on a global scale right now, to what extent has this war exposed the world's over dependency on energy, and how is it shaping global trade, especially for Africa and developing regions? Do you have some claims on that?
So I'm not the biggest expert on Africa and developing regions. It was never my prior focus. But however, I can say a few words on overdependency on energy. We can see that with such countries as Germany, for example, and that of course makes the leaders, the global leaders, the global political players more careful with what they are saying to Russia and how, with them trying to basically sit on two chairs. Or it also creates the dependency for such countries that are trying to get away from Russian impact and move very careful steps towards the EU, such as Serbia, for example. But the matter of dependence is that they just cannot do that with a click of the fingers because it was a long established trade agreements, long established processes, and just to go away from that, it is not possible in a day. But however, my core narrative here is still the same. If you are being too careful, if you are being too diplomatic, if you are being too nice with the regime that understands force and is using force, you will end up losing.
One is rather general, and we can also you can think out loud about this. But what do you think? Is there a solution that can end this war? I guess like right now.
I honestly do not see the war ending in the next at least half of a year, or realistically speaking, even a year. And also, I think that what is important here is that there is often a question about peace negotiations. Like, if we carry on the peace negotiations, will that help? And I think that Ukraine has always been open to negotiations, but that require both sides wanting peace. If Russia does not want peace, it wants submission. If it wants submission, what is the solution here? Because every time Ukraine has been asked to compromise, and then what we can see, Russia just escalated further. Crimea, Donbass, full invasion, right now making claims for 25% of our territory. And I think that to really end up the war, to really achieve peace, it requires to respect borders, it requires to respect liberty, and it does not mean just to reward the aggression. So right now it is, I do not see it as the realistic ending.
It's kind of related to what you were explaining before, but do you think that there could be a possibility that Russia attacked Ukraine because of the moving of NATO to include Ukraine in it? and then the peace talks don't work because of the security guarantees, which would equal be joining NATO?
I think that every country has its security concerns, but I think that no concern justifies invading neighbors, or annexing land, or killing civilians. And Russia's security concern is not NATO. I think that it is the very existence of free and democratic Ukraine. And that's why this war is the way it is.
Mhm. What lessons should smaller nations learn from this conflict about economic self-reliance and military preparedness? Mm.
I do not support Trump, but I think that he said one quite correct thing that I could agree with him on is that Europe needs to rely on themselves, not only on the US. And the same goes towards the defense industry, military defense industry in each country. And I think that it is important to invest into that because if to look at the statistics like Germany, for example, there is under production of military equipment in the last 5 years, while there are such developments in Europe. Then, if we are talking about smaller countries that in total will have like what 5 million of people maybe altogether, they should not play the nice guy with a country that is aggressive. They need to understand what is happening and one, and ask the international allies to react more sharply. So if there is the precedent, it should be addressed and resolved, not waiting while there will be another and another and another, because otherwise it will be just a fabula of a boy with wolves. And what is also very important, and I think that it is just from Ukrainian experience, I was thinking about it just these days. I'm very concerned if there are joint military trainings around someone's borders and there are troops that are not being withdrawn. And I think that seeing that troops are being concentrated around any borders, I think it should be a really bad sign, and governments should work on prevention of escalation in that sense.
Mhm. Perfect, thank you. Another one is this will be a little bit longer, but hello, Tanya. I'm Soldat. We met earlier this year at LibertyCon. As a political scientist, I wonder what we can do in Western European countries with the political parties that show sympathy for the Russian regime. Do you think they should be outlawed or more strongly surveilled?
I think that this is a very good question. Such parties exist. Such parties are basically spreading pro-Kremlin narratives, and they make the situation so much worse. I think what can really help, there are two things. First of all, the rising strength of parties that oppose their narratives and explaining the real situation and the real cost of Russian war. And the second thing, I think that it is impossible to ban these parties. No, but I think that it is important to address the electorate and um, raise the strength of the parties that choose safer European future other than just being Kremlin
Push the world into a new bipolar alignment or in multipolarity, like European Union, BRICS, inevitably.
Sorry, you are cutting. Could you please repeat?
Yeah. Could the war push the world into a new bipolar alignment, or is multipolarity inevitable?
I think that multipolarity is rather inevitable in this situation. I do not think any any stance will be here just black and white, because again, it is about in the end supporting a world order where multiple regional or global powers balance each other.
Now, question, Tanya, from my side, because we already reached out 6 p.m. How much time do you have? Because we still have some questions, but I want to also respect your time.
I actually have another call in 20 minutes, so I will have to connect very shortly there.
So we can say, like last 5 minutes, you can have you'll have time to prepare for the next call. Will that be okay?
Yeah, let's keep it up to 5 minutes and then I have to run.
Okay, perfect. Given the United Nations' limited role in stopping the war, do you think international institutions are failing, or are they simply too weak to handle conflicts involving superpowers?
Frankly speaking, I think that they are failing at these times because
Mhm.
it is not about the global weakness. Because what can we even see as global weakness? Not being able to give the proper response to one aggressive country, even with a relatively strong army. I do not think so. Is it about the diplomacy? It is kind of about the way of how the narratives are being built, the way of how conversations are being led. So yes, I think that while global leaders are issuing the statements that Europe is being deeply concerned, there is a real danger. And in case if the stance was changed and if global leaders started responding properly without prolongation, without just acting nice simply because of the depending on Russia when it comes to trade or energy or some other features, I think that then the situation could be changed for better and more efficient response.
Would actually be sustainable? A negotiated compromise or a total victory for one side?
The question is, which kind of compromise are we talking about? What can we see as a compromise? To give up land, to recognize the Crimea? If we recognize the Crimea, if we give up 25% of our territory, is it a real compromise? Is overall the sovereignty of the country can be considered a compromise? And again, it is not just the matter of Ukraine saving the territories, but I think that it is just the threat that Russia can go further and further and further and deeper towards the country, or to use the occupied and the next territories just as the playgrounds for attacking next countries and new targets.
Fight Russian propaganda inside West left and right wing people, structures. For example, a lot of people idealize Putin as a great leader that their countries need. Like,
Mm, I think that this is the was the question to how to fight Russian propaganda.
how to fight Russian propaganda in Western societies? Because both left wing and right wing have tendencies for like following the Russian narratives or propaganda. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. So I think that first of all, there is a very fake sentiment towards Putin, because I think it brings it down to the lack of the authority inside Europe, and the lack of authority of European leaders. However, I think that to idealize Putin is to justify his actions and to justify the international war crimes. And I think that if talking towards people, it does not matter whether we are talking on the matter on the level of institutions, or we are talking on the level of media, we are talking about more local basic level. It is important to explain that by supporting a war criminal, you are supporting authoritarian regimes, and you are supporting all the developments that Ukraine is having right now and that Eastern Europe may have in the next several years in case if this is not stopped. How to fight it? I think that it is very important to see what is really happening. First of all, there are reports. There are reports both domestically, Ukrainian from the Ukrainian government, which is being the official data, the reports from international institutions, missions that are going on observations and producing the information about what is really happening in the region. There are, if there are the if there is the access towards the international sources where you can see the data about the war, where you can see the numbers, where you can see the information about the level and amount of destruction that it is being caused, I think that it actually brings people to their senses a little bit. Because I think that in Western countries, what creates the problem is that people are a little bit detached from the reality. Like, yes, obviously, there is war, it is very sad, and there are people who suffer, but it's not their people, it's different people. And it does not happen because people think that it is unimportant. It just does not have that much of the connection with the daily life of an ordinary person. And I think that actually putting yourself into the context and analyzing more information brings more sanity. So if I was about to fight all these type of narratives, I was just give some reality checks and show the sources or make people to talk to those who witnessed that the first like first-handedly.
Thank you very much, Tania. We already passed the agreed 5 additional minutes. So I would like to thank you again very much for your presentation, your time, and answering the questions. We could see that there was plenty of questions. People are very interested in understanding how the conflict really looks like. So I hope that we helped to explain it a little bit better and people understand it a little bit more after this webinar. To all the participants, also thank you for showing up today. Be sure to follow We Are Innovation on social media, to follow Tania, to get more insights about not only about the war in Ukraine, but about all the other amazing stuff that they are doing as the organization and Tania personally. Next week, we're gonna gather again for the third webinar at this point. It's gonna be the webinar regarding AI, but I think Mario, you can give more of insights about it.
I will be short because Tania needs to go. So it will be with Emanuele Martinelli, an Italian PhD professor. It's very nice. So don't miss this opportunity to learn more. And that's it. Thank you for coming, and thank you, Tania and Blaže, for making it possible.
Thank you guys for having me, and thanks everyone for joining.
Blaže, don't forget the attendance.
No,
please.
no. Thank you very much, and see you guys next week.
See you later, guys. Ciao.
Bye.